Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart, and this week I'm continuing with my Renegade Crowns project, this time adding a little bit more firepower.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description. If you happen to be watching this video anywhere near the time that it's released, last week I made a video about how I kitbashed some regular ogre iron guts into some Badland ogres for use with my Renegade Crowns army, and I'm moving on to a war machine this week. I'm moving on to an organ gun, and each of my units has its own little flavour, very Dogs of War theme. So my mortar, in inverted commas here, is represented by the Halfling Hotpot and comes part of the Halfling contingent of my army. And my Bombard was originally in my Bretonnian army many months ago, has now been recommissioned and used in the Renegade Crowns army. I like the idea that each little group are their own thing. They come from their own city, have their own backstory. Now I picked up this really old Hellblaster from the Empire range, the original one, I believe, a periscope just on its own. It's about £13 on eBay, and then I reached for my spares. I've got lots of great sword sprues, I've got some Empire sprues as well. I'm just going to sort of go through my bits box really and create 3 crew members. I didn't have to do too much for the organ gun, or in inverted commas again, using that Hellblaster model. I'm pretty sure no one's going to mind me proxying it for it's a multi-barreled weapon, and you can't take a Hellblaster anyway in Renegade Crowns, so there can't be any confusion in that regard. But it cleaned up pretty easily. I didn't strip it. There was only really a black prime on there with a little bit of metallic paint, so I was quite happy to reprime it with the airbrush once it was all glued together. I purchased some Imperial Dwarves to use in my Nuln army. You get 2 champion options, one with a spear and one with a handgun. I needed the one with a spear for my army, so he's been sitting in a box for a little while. I thought he'd be a perfect leader for this little group, an Imperial Dwarf who has some history with cannons as well. So I just needed to kit bash 2 plastic human crewmen just to fill out those ranks and come up with a little cool story for each of them. Now, this isn't really a tutorial of how to build them, just a few shots of me working on them, just kind of illustrated. But I'm using an Empire State Trooper body for one with a Cathay head and Cathay arms, which you'll see in a moment. And then for the other, I'm using a greatsword body, but some standard State Troop arms. And I've made a sponge for one of them using some cut down flagellant flames and just stuck that to the end of a pole, so it looks a bit more like a regular sponge, even though it's probably too large for the very small barrels of the Hellblaster stroke organ gun anyway. But it's fun just adding a little bit of not even flair, just a little bit of character to the miniatures, using different bits from my bits box, which is really what this army is all about. I also made some very small projectiles to go in the organ gun, little circles, essentially, little balls, which didn't turn out very ball-like at the end. By the time I came to paint them, that probably looks more like a little basket of very burnt buns, but never mind, they'll do the job. And here we are, gun all ready to be primed black with the airbrush and the little basket of baked good stroke shot, with the little leader and then the 2 crewmen as well. So the one with Cathay in origin, who likes to light the wick using his bomb grenades, and then your standard spongeman. So I've primed all the miniatures black, as I always do, and I'm using a zenithal, as I nearly always do as well, with my airbrush. And it's quite important with these miniatures because I've decided upon a white and red uniform, different, as I've already mentioned, from many other units in the army. It's because they bring their own liveries with them. And what I try to do is to do very light, thin coats
from the side to start with, so that there's a grayscale there with the deepest black only in the real undercuts, and then I move towards almost directly down from the top and increase the intensity of that white, so you get this real nice transition between sort of the brightest white and the darkest black in those recesses. And on camera, because the way the lights bleach it out, it ends up looking very much like a white miniature, but there's absolutely loads of contrast in there if you're able to hold the miniature in your hand, and that really helps to give you a really nice smooth white and make painting white easy. As I so often do, I'm following that up with a dry brush of white over the top. I've hardly got any paint on my brush at all. I'm using a dry palette and then also a texture palette, so I can test, rather than on my hand, what kind of levels of paint are going to come off when I dry brush onto the miniatures. I'm really just trying to catch the edges of the texture, not the flats of the miniature, so the very edges of packs and belts and things like that, but also any hair. And you see as I move on to the gun itself, I'm catching as much of the wood grain as I possibly can. I've done a zenithal on that as well. Next stage, I'm going to deal with the wood on the gun mostly, and then also using the same method on the pole of the sponge as well. It's a method I've used in loads of videos, and I'll pop a link in now to a video that I focused on just how I paint wood using speed and contrast paints, thinned and then wet blended together on the miniature, as you can see me doing here. It's a really simple method. I think it produces some really nice effects, and you can use lots of different mixes of these kind of paints for different wood effects. So I'll pop that link in, as I said, and go and check that video out. It's something that a lot of people have enjoyed and asked me about in videos. That's why I put the video together. And something else I'm going to say now, every paint that I use, I will hold up to the camera so you can pause and make a note of it if you like. If you want to see all of them in one go, I will take pictures of them and I'll share them on my Patreon. That will be available to free patrons as well as paid patrons, so any member of the public can go along and sign up to the Patreon for free as a free level member, and then you'll be able to see all the paints that I've used. So if you just want to watch along but you do want to see all the paints and things I use, there's a way of doing that all in one place later on if you don't want to sit there with a notepad and pen. What you see me doing here is dry brushing over the top again afterwards really lightly with an off-white colour, a bone colour, and I'm then going to glaze back again, and I'm going to be using contrast skeleton horde, which I find is normally the best for this, and it's just finishing off that wood technique that I was talking about. But again, that's all covered in that video that I linked a few moments ago. And for this week's project, I'm carrying on with the metals first, I think, because I focused on finishing off the gun first before I did anything else. That's not always the case. I may start with other areas first, and if I started with the crew, I may well have started with the rest of their uniforms before doing the metallics. It doesn't really matter too much, but what you'll see now is me working through the metals and using the same metal recipes on the gun and then onto the bits of armor that is on the crew as well. And I'm starting with a brown metallic, and I like to call it a brown metallic because it's just an easier way of getting across what I mean. Some paint ranges will call it brass or copper or dull gold and all these other different combinations, but a brown based metallic first, so that when I apply gold on top, it will be a perfect base coat for it. But when I apply steel and silver colors on top as well, it makes the metal look a little bit deeper in color, look a little bit more weathered in places, and I really like the effect that it gives me. I cover most of that brown metallic up, but the tone that it gives you is just brilliant. I really enjoy using it. For the next stage, I'm using a really dark metallic as well. This is almost a black metallic. I'm using that first on the shot or the burnt buns, or whatever you want to call them, in that little basket there, and then applying it. This is the real base layer over the top of that brown. You can see I'm sort of applying it fairly thin, so some of that brown is still showing through, but again, it just gives you the base color for nearly all of the steel that is going to be on the armor and on the metal areas that aren't gold on the weapon. It's exactly the same principle on the armor panels as well, just leaving a little bit of that brown in the recesses. Basically is layering painting, but it works very well and just adds some real depth to the overall look of the armor and makes it look a little bit less flat, and really helps, means that when you do add some washes and things later on, it doesn't always need quite as much to give it the kind of definition that looks really good. This is called Pig Iron. I'm using all P3 at the moment, really enjoying them, so I recommend them now. I feel comfortable enough, having tried them enough, to definitely start recommending them to people. They've got real natural shine to them. They have quite a glossy finish, which is handy at times for metallic paints if you want real shine on them as well. And this Pig Iron is somewhere in between that really dark metal and the brighter silvers. It's slightly desaturated and, well, an iron colour, which is probably why it's named that. And then I move on to this more silver colour on top. For the Pig Iron, I didn't use that on the armour plate, so I skipped that stage because I want them to look a little bit brighter. Also, it's a smaller area, so I don't need quite as many different stages, but I'm using a sponge here, just building up through the layers, trying to leave a little bit of each previous colour showing, and it's super simple, really quick when you're using sponges like this, and you get these nice little transitions and you can focus where that light is hitting and shining on the metallic areas. You can use the sponges on the smaller miniatures as well, but you've got to be careful where you get into the smaller parts of the miniature. But I skipped that Pig Iron stage. I'm using that slightly brighter mid-steel colour now. And you can see there you've already got this sort of nice natural shine to it. You could stop there really. You've got your brown, your really black metal. And then this, I will add a little bit more. Maybe if I was painting a whole unit or something, I might stop at this stage. But it's looking pretty good already for such a simple process. And then we're on to Quicksilver, which is the brightest in the range. It actually looks a little bit whitish or desaturated, which takes away the shine. It's one of the things that I don't like about certain ranges of metallic paints, that the very brightest silvers don't have that real shine and punch. And I think it's to do with the way they're manufactured and the amount of I think there's white pigment that goes into them sometimes as well, or at least a grey pigment. But once this paint is applied, you don't see that whatsoever. So I was really happily impressed when I first used it, and it's, as you can see, adding real shine using all those same methods, just making sure that I'm being quite deliberate and gentle with how much I add in the highlighting layers, and again still using them on the crew themselves, just on the top of the helmet there, focusing on that top ridge and just being very gentle with that bit of sponge. You get this just really nice highlighted effect. After that, it's a case of just picking out a few little extra bits of detail like the rivets on the gun wheels, and that's it. We're ready to go for the next stage. Not an awful lot of gold or coppers on these miniatures. There's a little sort of shield and an emblem sign on the side of the gun itself, so I'm just painting that in the darker copper gold colour first, and then highlighting with the brighter gold just to make it look a little bit posher. It would look equally quite cool, I think, just as like it's branded on the side in steel as well, but I thought I'd make it stand out a little bit and just give one little change of colour to break up all of that sort of plain steel colour on the gun. For the crew, it's limited very much to the hilt and pommel of the dwarf's little blade, and he's got a little gold clasp on the top of his hat that's holding his feathers in place, but there's not really an awful lot more. The Cathayan themed or semi-Cathayan themed crewman, I've used the bronzish colour a little bit on his sort of hourglass that he's got and on the bombs as well. A couple of brown speed paints to pick out the few leather straps and belts and things that are on the crew members. There's really not an awful lot on them, which is nice because it saves the time. There are quite often the most time consuming pieces to paint, especially when you're going for a white uniform like this. You want to be super careful not to overspill too much, because I want that nice clean finish without having to go back and do too much touch up on it later on. They were also perfect colours for the footwear as well. You can obviously paint the shoes and an awful lot of different colours, but I decided to keep the palette limited. It stops the miniature looking too busy, especially Games Workshop miniatures when they've got so much detail packed on there anyway. If you've got too many things going on, it can send the eye all over the place. So sometimes I like to keep my life simple as well by sticking to one or two colours where I can. And a nice little trio of paints from the Ruddy Brown's flexible triad from Army Painter Fanatic, and I'm just using them in different places, and something like the belts or the packs, and maybe we'll just use the mid and the brightest tone to do some edge highlighting. Areas like the boots, I might want to use the darker tone a little bit as well, but I'm working with that speed paint that's already gone over a white zenithal base. So you've already got what looks like a highlight there anyway. That's what the speed paints do. So in many ways you can just accentuate the highlights that are already there. Sometimes you want to sort of fill out a colour a little bit, and sometimes the highlight is so good because the area is so small, like a little pack or something, you can just do the edges and paint some scratches on, and that can look really good just by itself. And that's one of the beauties of painting in this way. The accent colour with the white uniform is going to be red, and it's just a simple choice. It looks good, and I really enjoy painting red. I find it quite easy. There's lots of little pleats inside the trousers and the clothing on all of the crew actually, but definitely the dwarf, he's got the most of it, so I'm just deciding to paint all of those red in between. And then there's a feather. That's actually 3 feathers on the top of his hat as well. One's going to be red, one's going to be white, and one's going to be black. And then just to make it sort of stand out a little bit more, I decided to paint his whole sleeves red, and I'm going to continue that over that theme for the rest of the crew as well. But very much rinse and repeat for the other 2 crew members. They have similar styles of uniform that you can pick out similar areas as well. So the little red areas on those sort of inner parts of the uniform, painting those arms red, trying to be careful like I did with the leather belts and things, not to overspill with that red onto the white, because I want to keep that as clean as possible for the same reasons I mentioned a few moments ago. I wasn't sure how far I wanted to highlight the red or how far I needed to highlight the red, so I'm using pure red, which I knew was almost a logical next stage from the Blood Angels red, which is really super rich, and when it goes into those recesses looks a good shade darker than it does on the flat areas, which is exactly what you want to do with the contrast paint. It's got such a smooth coverage. It's one of the real winners in the paint ranges for those kind of quick kind of paints at the moment, and this really tidies it up quite nicely, leaving the dark in the recesses and working with those lighter areas, almost accentuating them and building upon what's already there. Sticking to the Cool Reds flexible triad, I've gone for a paint 2 stages along from the other red, and just adding some sort of very subtle highlights, mainly to the edges of the areas of red clothing. So it's not full on edge highlighting, but just focusing on those sharper edges where the light would hit the most, or the tops of any folds in the clothing as well. Just some neat lines to make it stand out and pop a little bit more. I think it really adds lots to the miniature, really contrasts well against the rest of the white uniform. So this is Ashenstone and Holy White, essentially both greys really. Ashenstone is a grey contrast paint for sure, a light grey, and the Holy White is what would be called a white contrast paint, or speed paint in this instance. And essentially what they are is very subtle wash type glazes. Each of your contrast paints has different properties. Some of them, like the Blood Angels red, is really great to go over as a nice smooth coat. These work better in the recesses in very thin glazes, in my opinion. So you're covering over your white miniature, allowing it to go into the detail, but not allowing it to be too thick, almost fall away off those top surfaces. You can even wipe it away with a clean brush. You get this really nice smooth area that you can then go back and just touch up, highlight a little bit with some white and some greys, and really make a nice smooth, real punchy white uniform. It's definitely made painting white an awful lot easier than it used to be before they existed. A little bit of skeleton horde here. There's a little parchment piece on the back of the Cathayan themed, not that his body's Cathayan themed, it's pure Empire state troop, but you get the idea. He's wearing a uniform, but there's a little bit of parchment on the back, so I'm just picking it out in this, and it just stands out really nicely actually from the rest of the white uniform. And then a little bit of Nazdrag yellow, just to really pick out the dwarf's beard. I like the idea that this dwarf's a young good dwarf that's sought his fortune in the Empire. Maybe had an uncle that had already moved to the Empire as an Imperial dwarf, and he's gone off as a young dwarf to seek his fortune. Grim black is fast becoming my favourite black in this type of paint. The Warhammer ones, the Citadel, ex-Citadel, now Warhammer ones are very good, but this is just the best overall. It runs into the recesses really well. It's thin enough that it does allow the detail to show through, giving you somewhere to highlight on top on, like I will be later, or if you want to just leave it, it works as well. So just the one crewman's hair, and then the hair on the end of the sponge that I made from the flames. So while that's drying, I can return to the white now. I've got a very bright grey and the pure white there on my wet palette, and allow them to be nice and thin, and just gently building up where it looks a little bit dull because of that layer of the speed paint, the holy white in most cases here. I'm trying to be quite subtle here, working with what's brighter already and just accentuating it rather than trying to paint the white in. As soon as you find yourself starting to do that, white can quite often be quite chalky and quite streaky, and in most cases I managed to avoid that here. And obviously you can't highlight white. Once you are to the top area of your white, the brightest it will go, you can't add anything else on there. So you really got to think of painting white as an off grey or an off cream colour, and then just adding a little bit of white to the very, very last stages of it. So you've got that transition from that grey all the way to the brightest spots at the end, and you end up with a nice smooth finish. And sticking with the white themes, this is Ashen Stone, I believe. It's a off-white, a bone colour. I'm just using that along with a little bit of white as well, just to slightly highlight that bit of parchment that we saw me adding the skeleton horde in as its base colour a little bit earlier on. It's time to highlight that beard, so I'm starting with a little bit of Fiendish Yellow, which is still fairly rich. It's got some of the ochre-y colour, which is very similar to the top areas after I've added that Nasdrak Yellow, which has gone into those recesses quite nicely. Then for added an extra punch, moving on to Demonic Yellow, just for that subtle highlight layer at the top of it, just to make it stand out that little bit more. 2 grades here. Most of the work is done with the lighter grey. Again, subtle highlights on the black areas. So we've got that little black feather, the smallest one on the top of the dwarf's hat. A few lines on the top of the sponge for the one crewman, and then when we move on to the Cathayan heritage crewman, his black hair needs some highlights as well. So it's a few faint lines. Most of it, along with the detail on the miniature, the actual hair that's tight to his head is very smooth, especially at the back. There's not really any detail at all, so I'm having to paint some neat thin lines in, but it does work. It just adds enough to make it sort of stand out, but you don't want it so heavy he ends up looking old and grey. Now onto the skin. It's the one I've been using most of the time at the moment. There's a Moonstone skin, but I'm using a standard flesh wash from Army Painter. I started using this recently and I'm really enjoying it. It's not normally the way I paint, or historically for the last year or two I've not used flesh washes at all. I've just started from the darkest and worked my way up, and I'm still using something similar here. I'm starting for a bit of a mid-tone, almost washing it back and making it a little bit darker with that wash, before I return with that same base layer again. So almost straight out of the Citadel painting guidebook of doing a base layer and then giving it a wash. It doesn't always work very well, but I really like the way these paints are working with it. And when there's not much flesh showing on these miniatures, this was quite a quick and efficient way of doing it. I'm still highlighting the same way as I normally do. I'm still adding some glazes of colours at the end, which we'll get to in a moment. I won't show you in loads of detail because I have to get myself into all kinds of awkward angles to paint eyes, but I do it at this stage so that when I continue to highlight the flesh afterwards, I won't have to go and fix that if I mess up painting an eye, and I definitely do, and I'm sure we all do at times. So here's the rest of the flesh paints I've used. That Moonstone skin is what I used for the base coat that I've washed back, but now I'm starting with that again, leaving all of that wash in the recesses. It's just a good wash. It's not too overbearing, and leaves just enough in the recesses that gives you a nice subtle shadow, but working my way using the detail on the miniatures, and I don't fight against that detail. So I'm working with the cheekbones, and working with foreheads and noses and chins and things that stand out that would catch the light, and I'm always thinking about what would catch the light. Then the optional extra, and a fan favourite on the channel for people who watch it all the time, so apologies for those of you who are dozing off during this period, but I use these 2 contrast paints all the time. The purple one goes into the little recesses around where the skin meets another area of something, so like the cuff of a sleeve or the brow of the hair, or the top of a hat or something. So it's almost like adding shadow in there, and it just works really well. And then the lighter colour, the pinker colour, the reddish pink, I thin it and glaze it over the bottom third of the face, and quite often on the tops of the hands into the knuckles, and I'll go back with a clean brush and then feather it out a little bit and blend it all out, and it just adds a little bit more variation and depth to the overall look of the flesh, makes it look like it's painted to a higher standard than it really is. Actually, I quite like the effect, and it's just super simple, especially where it's grey on the end of a dwarf's nose, which always looks handy painting red from all the beer that he's been drinking. We're nearly done now, so moving on to oil washes. I've got dark mud and grease, which are my favourite go-tos most of the time from Scale 75's Soilworks range. I'm using the dark mud just on the gun. I'm not using it on the crewman at all, just where the metal would be a little bit more dirty and ingrained, so I'm going back and adding it on there a little bit thicker. And then for the rest of the miniature, I'm adding that grease colour as well, and I continue that over onto the base because it becomes my wash to go over the rocks that are on the base, which is cat sand kit litter, and then over the texture base, which I haven't shown you doing on camera because I've repeated it so many times throughout painting units for this army. And there is a video all about how I approach my basing, and I will pop a link in to that one as well now if I can remember. For the crew, I'm just using the grease oil wash on the little areas of metal that's on the miniature, be that gold or steel colour, it works fine, allowing it to run into the recesses and knowing that I can wipe it away from the flat surfaces if I want to as well, and then continuing it over to the base. If you are new to using oil washes, you want to make sure you use an older brush. They are quite strong and can strip paint, so a lot of people will varnish beforehand. I find that most metallic paints are robust enough to deal with it in small quantities, and I'm only really applying it here to the base or onto where the metallic paints are, so I haven't varnished to protect them beforehand. But it's well worth trying them out if you haven't before. They run into the recesses, they weather the miniature, and one of the best parts is they don't leave sort of streaky pulled areas afterwards. So I'm moving on to some dark stain, which is another of the colours in the Scale colour range for that, and it's almost a black colour, really dark strong black, and I'm applying that just over my burnt buns stroke cannonballs that are in that basket there. Then the beauty, it's some artist thinner, and you can use it to take the oil paints back off, so even if it has pulled a little bit, you don't get stuck having to repaint like you might have to with a standard wash. You can buff it away like this using a bit of sponge, or you can wipe it away again using an old brush, but using it dipped into that thinner and just wiping it away. You do not use standard white spirit that you might use for DIY, because you really will strip your paint off them. And there we really are coming to the end of the miniatures. So I'm just tidying up the middles of those armour plates, really making them pop and stand out, cleaning away where some of the oil paint might have dulled it a little bit too much. And again, I just love using this process. Again, the same with the top of the hat and the little bit of chest plate that's on the second crewman. And then it's really on to finishing off the rest of the bases, which, like I've already mentioned, I'm not going to cover in great detail here. So let's have a look at the finished miniatures. I'm really happy to have finished yet another unit for the army. That's all my artillery, at least of my 2,000 points done. So 2 more units, a big block of spearmen and 10 handgunners to go, and that's 2k ready. So I will be bringing those to you as and when I can on the channel. I'd like to do it soon. Still waiting on some of the miniatures at the moment, but they will hopefully be done this summer and not too far off. But let me know what you think in the comments of them. I had loads of fun doing them. I love the ability to be able to make them a little bit different to the rest of the units in the army. It's just so much fun, and that's one of the real joys of painting Renegade Crowns, and this project for me is treating it a little bit like Dogs of War and making up my own units. A future video will be those final 2 units, and then maybe as part of the same video, maybe it's a separate one, a bit of a rundown of the whole army and the names of the characters, and maybe even a little bit of the lore that I make up for each of the units and the whole army, and what brings it all together. As always, thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm having so much fun painting all of the different units for my Renegade Crowns project. There's certainly an element of freedom that each time I start a new unit, I'm getting to pick some cool models, kitbash some bits, and paint them whatever colour I want. It doesn't really matter what colours I've painted the rest of the army before. The way the theme works, I can keep doing what I want to, really, which is just loads of fun. If you're enjoying following along at home as well and you'd like to support me and the channel, please do consider supporting me on Patreon. It's the very best way you can help me continue to make videos like this. I absolutely love doing it, but it does take an awful long time to paint and film and then edit and present videos like this. I also do lots of reviews as well, and opinion pieces and talking to camera, and some of those take a little bit less time to do than the painting videos, but at its heart, the channel has always been first and foremost most about the painting side of the hobby, and that's definitely not going to change. If you enjoy that and you can afford to support me on Patreon, I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to all my existing patrons. If you can't afford to or don't want to do that, that's absolutely fine as well. I really do appreciate all of you who are watching my videos and commenting on liking, and that really is a super help as well. So if you don't want to support me on Patreon, please do drop a comment below, give me a like on this video as well, and check out all my other videos. But thank you very much for watching. Take care. I'll catch you soon.